This is a personal story that happened 2 years ago. At the time, I needed a place to calm down. After the sudden loss of my parents, I needed to be away from all the noise. Through an online forum, I found a cheap rental house in a mountainous area. It was in a remote location and reportedly had beautiful views. The house was made of old wood. It stood alone on a slope, with access via a narrow, rarely traveled stone path. From the outside, the house looked fragile, but it was still habitable. And when I first arrived, I felt this place was truly quiet. Too quiet. The first night, I couldn't sleep. Even though the air was cold, my body felt hot and uncomfortable. It felt like there was something heavy in the air. In the middle of the night, I heard a noise from behind the house. It sounded like someone was walking on the wooden porch. His steps were slow, but clear. One step, and then he stopped. I thought it was an animal, maybe a civet or a stray dog. But when I peeked out the window, there was no one there. And when I opened the back door to check, the cold was different. It wasn't a normal mountain breeze. It was like the air from an empty room that hadn't been opened in a long time. But there was no one there. I went back to bed. But at 3 a.m., I woke up again. To the sound of the floor. A loud creak, like someone much heavier than me had stepped on it. The sound came from inside the house. I immediately turned on the flashlight and checked every room. There was nothing. No sign of a forced opening of a window. No door was open. But the scent of damp earth suddenly came from the kitchen. It was a scent I'd never smelled before. And in the morning, when I checked the back porch, there were mud marks in the shape of bare feet. But strangely, there were only traces of entering the house, no traces of leaving again. That day, I barely slept. I spent the morning sitting in front of the house, drinking instant coffee. All the while wondering who left those barefoot footprints. The footprints were larger than my feet, and the mud was still a bit wet when I found them. What made it even more unbelievable was that this house had no fence. There were no back stairs either. To get to the back porch, you had to take a one-way path. There was no way someone could have entered quietly without leaving any traces. I tried to think logically. Maybe they were large animal tracks, or maybe they were my own tracks from yesterday afternoon that hadn't had time to dry yet. But this part kept bothering me. Why were there only tracks coming in, but no tracks coming out? Day 2. As evening approached, the air grew colder than before. The sky was thick with mist. The wind began to whisper faintly through the pine trees. Around 10 p.m., I heard footsteps again. Soft. Heavy. But this time it wasn't outside. The footsteps sounded from the attic. I was certain this house was only one story. There were no stairs. No access to the top. But the sound was clear. It sounded like someone was walking slowly above my head. Each step sounded creaky, dragging, like bare feet touching old, rotting wooden planks. I stood still in the middle of the room, holding my breath. The walls of the house trembled gently with every sound. I finally got out and checked around with a flashlight. I climbed onto a small chair and shone it up toward the ceiling. It turned out there was a wooden shutter at the end of the ceiling, a kind of small, sliding door. There was no folding ladder. No tool to open it. But it was clearly upstairs. And I don't know why. I decided not to open it that night. But I realized one thing that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. The ceiling of this house was colder than the rest of the house. The cold air should have been flowing downwards. I went to sleep that night, playing soft music on my phone. The footsteps in the attic stopped around dawn. But around 5 a.m., I woke to the sound of someone breathing heavily from the kitchen. I immediately sat up. I didn't move. I didn't dare look toward the kitchen, because the breathing repeated itself twice. Then it stopped. And after that, the sound of very slow footsteps retreating further and further away, and then disappearing. On my third day in the house, I began to feel a small change. Not in the house, but in the way I felt inside. Certain parts of the room were getting colder by the day. Not because of the weather, but because the air felt dead. There was no airflow. No warmth, even when the sun was shining brightly. Especially in the corner of the room, near the old wardrobe. Every time I stand there, my heart beats faster, for no reason. It's like standing too close to a stranger you know you don't want to get close to. That day, I decided to open the attic door I'd found the night before. I figured it was time to find out for sure what was up there. Using a broom handle, I gently pushed open the wooden door. Once it was open, I shone a small flashlight up. The attic was cramped and dusty. There were large cobwebs in every corner. And in the middle of it, there was an old burlap sack that looked damp at the bottom. It looked as if it had just been moved. I didn't go up, because when the flashlight reflected off the wall, I saw black streaks, faint but clear, like dirty hands touching and wiping the wall from the inside. Not just once, but repeatedly. There were 5, 6 more. And when I shone the light to the other side, I saw the dried imprint of a bare foot on the wood. Why would there be a human footprint in a place you can't enter without a ladder? I immediately closed the door again. Quickly. Without thinking. That night I slept sitting up. I couldn't lie down, because the sounds from upstairs were getting more frequent. They weren't footsteps anymore, but scraping, like someone crawling. And around 3 a.m., the floor directly behind the bed began to vibrate gently, as if being stepped on from beneath. Not long afterward, I felt my bed shift slightly. I immediately turned on the flashlight and the lamp. There was no one there. But when I got out of bed, the carpet beneath me was wet. And the smell wasn't just water. It was more like the smell of a puddle of dirt, long out of reach of sunlight. I'm starting to get convinced. I'm not the only one living in this house. There's something I don't want to touch on the top of the house. And it seems, after I opened the attic, it started paying closer attention to me too. Ever since I opened the attic, this house hasn't been the same. From a refuge, it now feels more like a trap. That day, I tried to leave the house early. Just to walk downstairs, to get a signal, to check in with a friend, or to find another place to stay. But all the way down, my body felt like it was being held down, not by fatigue, but by a weight in the air. Each step became heavier. And the strangest thing, I walked for almost 25 minutes, but I didn't get anywhere. The route felt repetitive. The same rocks. The same tree branches. There were even fallen leaves that I was sure I had already stepped on. I stopped, backed up. And strangely, I got home much faster. It was like the distance was in a different direction. From that moment on, I realized this place didn't want me to leave. Fourth night. I tried not to sleep. I just sat in the living room, all the lights on, flashlight on standby. Around 1 a.m., I heard the sound of a wooden chair being moved from inside the bedroom. There was no chair there. I was sure of it. I stood up and slowly approached. The bedroom door was still tightly closed. When I slowly opened it, the floor was empty. But inside the room, the scent of wet earth grew stronger. And one of the things that made my heart skip a beat the most was the fog. The window pane was covered in condensation, and in the center was a fresh handprint from inside. 5 fingers. Even. Symmetrical. The print was slowly fading, but I knew it wasn't mine. I slept outside that night. On the floor. The lights remained on. But around 3 a.m., the lights went out. All of them. All at once. In the darkness, I heard heavy breathing again. But this time, it wasn't from outside the room. Not from the kitchen. But from the back of my neck. It was as if someone was sitting behind me, lowering their head, and taking a long, slow breath. I didn't move. I didn't turn on the flashlight. I didn't scream. I just closed my eyes and held my breath. A few seconds later, the floor I was sitting on shook slightly. There was a sound like a hand dragging something across the wooden floor. Closer. Then farther away. A minute later, the lights came back on. And when I opened my eyes, I saw muddy handprints stuck to the floor near my feet. 2 palms. Facing inward. As if someone had been sitting across from me. I didn't sleep until morning. The lights were on. But every time I glanced in the corner of the room, the shadows weren't the same. Sometimes there was a shape like a person standing still. Sometimes it disappeared. And sometimes it appeared in a different place. But I couldn't be sure. There was no sound. No movement. Just a presence. And the feeling that I was being watched from more than one direction. Around 6 a.m., I packed my things. I knew I had to leave, even though part of me was telling me to wait a little longer. But I forced my way out. As soon as I opened the door, something caught my breath. In front of the house, right on the wet ground, there were dozens of bare footprints. They all led toward the house. Not from the driveway, but from the forest. Not just 1 or 2, but many. Small. Large. It was as if the house had never been empty in the first place. It was as if they all came every night, and I just hadn't noticed. I got in the car and started the engine. But the car wouldn't start right away. 3 times, the starter finally started. And as the road went down, the scenery along the road changed drastically. The trees along the roadside were denser than usual. The sky was darker even though it was only morning. And the right side mirror was fogged up from the inside. I knew full well it couldn't possibly be from my body, because when I wiped, there was a small handprint beneath the dew. From inside. I almost swerved, but I kept going. Finally, I reached the roadside guard post, which I had passed on my way in. An old man was guarding it. When he saw my car, his expression changed. "Are you from that wooden house?" I just nodded. "You shouldn't have opened the top of that house." I remained silent. I didn't say anything. But from the look on his face, I knew one thing for sure. Whatever had been living in that house, it wasn't unfamiliar to the locals. They just didn't want to interfere. A few days after I got home, I found a photo on my phone that I never took. The image was dark, but I could clearly see a pale face standing in the attic, looking down.